I want to talk to you about the assurance case. Now, everybody knows that when you do the specification, you're essentially saying what you want to buy. I mean, that's obviously important in the acquisition process. In fact, the more detailed you can make it, the more control you have over the process. And so that's a very good thing. But there are aspects of the software that are essentially intangible, that don't get picked up in the specification except as non-functional items, like software must be secure. And those things are critical to the security side of the acquisition. So when you do the acquisition, you obviously have to be able to say what you want, but at the same time, you have to also be able to say what security properties you need it to have, and that's the assurance case. Now, what the assurance case does is provide the point of reference that you can use during the rest of the process to test whether the software is meeting the security requirements you have in mind. The assurance case basically states behaviors the software has to exhibit. Software, I mean, the example I used earlier was not a good one because there's no way you can tell whether the software is secure. That's just an intangible. But if the software displays certain properties that would be characteristic of security properties, and more importantly, if it behaves in a certain way that can be described, those properties and that behavior are what the security case, or the assurance case, represents. And so the idea basically is when you sit down to specify what functions you need in the software, you also need to do, and hopefully this isn't a separate item, hopefully this is something where the non-functional items or the security functional items are actually part of the specification. They should be, because as you move down down the acquisition process, that spec is going to drive what the supplier supplies, and it's also going to drive how you evaluate the supplier's product. But bottom line basically is, what should you specify? Well, first thing you need to specify for the assurance case are the precise properties the software has to exhibit. Now, again, those have to be observable. And so you can't say the software must be reliable. What you need to say instead is that the software has to be function correctly with no, I'm sorry, correctly isn't even the right word. Software has to function with no breakdowns. And so you have to have 98% uptime. That would be observable. And I can tell whether it's been running 98% of the time or 2% of the time it's not running correctly. The same thing applies to vulnerabilities. The software may not exhibit any discernible or any defects that can be exploited. Now again, there may be things in there that are not identified yet, but the idea basically is that if you put that into the assurance case, then you know to look for defects that are exploitable in the code. There may be other kinds of defects, and the problem basically is that a vulnerability is always a defect, but a defect isn't always a vulnerability. And so the idea basically with the assurance case is you outline those things that are considered to be vulnerabilities, and those are literally placed in the specification, because you're going to use that later on as your criteria for evaluation of the suppliers, what the supplier is supplying. The other thing is the behaviors, and again, that's something that says what the software has to do, and the idea that all interfaces have to be defined, all hooks between or interdependencies have to be defined, and that's something which can be observed again. And if it's observable, then you can judge it. Now, it may not be all 50%. You would never want to say that a vulnerability is a good thing in a piece of software, but you might be able to say that all defects that represent vulnerabilities have been identified and resolved with patches, and the rest of the defects which do not affect the security performance of the software have been put on a list for further addressing. Bottom line basically is that the assurance case states all the things that you want the software to do or have in terms of a property. That becomes the basis for the development of these non-functional areas of the spec. It can also be the basis for the development of the functional areas, I might add. Meaning you can describe security functions the software has to exhibit, like, for instance, the software must be recoverable. And that would be a additional function that the software would have to carry out above and beyond the functions, that it performs if, for instance, it's a piece of general ledger software. And so the idea basically is that the assurance case provides the basis for testing the software to ensure that it is correct and from a security standpoint. And basically you are not going to be able to buy a piece of software if you don't know exactly what security properties it's supposed to have. And so an assurance case is not an optional, it's a must-have if you want to have secure acquisition.